Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into something that's gonna absolutely blow your minds. What if Deku was neglected and decided to leave? But not just leave, what if he became the most terrifying villain hero society has ever seen? Now listen up, because this concept is absolutely broken. We're talking about Izuku Midoriya, the kid who analyzed every single hero fight, memorized every technique, understood quirks better than most pros, suddenly getting a quirk that lets him copy and synthesize other people's abilities. Think about it, this is the same guy who wrote entire notebooks breaking down how All Might's combat style works, who figured out hero weaknesses just from watching footage. Now imagine him with Dabai's flames, Toga's transformation, and the analytical mind that made him the ultimate fanboy. That's not just overpowered, that's reality breaking. So we thought, what if we took this tactical genius, gave him the most versatile quirk imaginable, and then made him absolutely hate the hero system that threw him away? We get a villain who doesn't just fight heroes. He systematically dismantles everything they stand for while proving that the quirkless loser they ignored was actually the most dangerous person in the room the entire time. This story follows Izuku's transformation from broken dreamer to feared mastermind, his brutal psychological warfare against All Might and Bakugo, and the ultimate question of whether redemption is possible when you've burned down everything you once believed in. If this sounds as epic as I think it does, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring that notification bell, because we're covering the most insane fanfic concepts on this channel. Alright, let's dive into this masterpiece. The acceptance letter felt heavier than paper had any right to. Izuku Midoriya stared at the holographic display projected from the small device, watching All Might's miniature form congratulate him with that trademark smile. The words blurred together, "Welcome to UA, proud to have you, become a great hero," but the warmth in his chest was real. For the first time in years, genuine hope bloomed in his heart. Mom, I got in." He burst through the apartment door, waving the device like a trophy. "I actually got into UA." Inko looked up from her magazine, her expression flickering between surprise and something else, something that made Izuku's smile falter slightly. "Oh, that's nice, Izuku." She turned back to her reading. "I suppose they lowered their standards." The words hit like ice water. "Mom, this is UA, the top hero school in Japan. Izuku," her voice carried that familiar edge of exhaustion. "You're quirkless. How long do you think you'll last before you embarrass yourself, before you get hurt?" She didn't look up. "Maybe it would be better if you considered something more realistic." The acceptance letter suddenly felt like lead in his hands. The next morning, Izuku arrived at UA with determination burning in his chest despite his mother's words. The massive gates loomed before him, and students with incredible quirks streamed past, some flying, others crackling with electricity, one girl literally floating her belongings behind her. "I belong here," he told himself firmly. "I earned this." The day passed in a blur of introductions, facility tour, and administrative procedures. But there was one person Izuku needed to see, one conversation that would make everything real. As the orientation concluded, Izuku spotted the familiar shock of blonde hair towering above the crowd. All Might was speaking with several teachers near the main building, his heroic presence commanding attention even in his civilian clothes. This was it, his chance. "All Might," Izuku called out, jogging over with his notebook clutched tight. Several students turned to look, but Izuku only had eyes for his hero. "All Might, sir, could I speak with you privately? It's important." The symbol of peace turned, and for just a moment, Izuku could have sworn he saw something flicker across those sharp blue eyes. "Ah, young man, of course." The public smile was brilliant as always. "Walk with me." They moved away from the crowd, finding a quiet corridor near the faculty offices. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs as he gathered his courage. "All Might, sir, I've been following your career since I was 4 years old. You've been my inspiration, my reason for never giving up on my dream of becoming a hero." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I know I'm quirkless, but I got into UA on my own merit. I want to prove that anyone can be a hero with enough determination and—" "Stop." The single word cut through Izuku's speech like a blade. All Might's smile had vanished, replaced by an expression of cold reality that Izuku had never seen before. "Kid, I'm going to give you some advice that might hurt, but it's better you hear it from me than learn it the hard way." All Might's voice was quieter now, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. Being a hero isn't about determination or heart, it's about power, real, measurable power. Izuku felt the world tilt beneath his feet. But sir, you always say that anyone can be a hero. That's for the cameras, son. All Might's eyes were sad but firm. In the real world, heroes without quirks don't exist. They can't exist. You'll get yourself killed, or worse, get someone else killed trying to save you. The notebook slipped from Izuku's numb fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud. I've seen dozens of kids like you over the years, All Might continued, each word driving deeper into Izuku's chest. Full of dreams, full of hope, and I've seen what happens to them when reality hits. Please, for your own sake, find a different dream. Be a police officer, a rescue worker, a support technician. There are plenty of ways to help people that won't get you killed. Izuku's voice came out as barely a whisper. But I got into UA, doesn't that mean something? All Might's expression softened with what might have been pity. UA has many courses, son. I'm sure you'll find your place in one of them, just not as a hero. The symbol of peace walked away, leaving Izuku alone in the corridor with his shattered dreams scattered around his feet like the pages of his fallen notebook. That evening, Izuku sat in his room, staring at the UA acceptance letter on his desk. His mother's voice drifted through the thin walls, talking on the phone with someone, probably his aunt. I told him it was a mistake, but does he listen? No, he's just like his father, too stubborn for his own good. What do you mean, be supportive? I'm being realistic. The boy is going to get himself killed chasing impossible dreams. No, I don't think I'm being too harsh. Someone has to prepare him for the real world. Izuku closed his eyes, All Might's words echoing in his mind alongside his mother's dismissive tone. The two people who should have believed in him most had made their positions crystal clear. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was just a delusional kid playing at being something he could never become. But as he looked at his collection of hero analysis notebooks, at years of research and training and hope, something else stirred in his chest. Not the warm hope from this morning that had died in a UA corridor. This was something colder, harder. If being a hero requires power, Izuku thought, his green eyes reflecting the city lights outside his window, then I'll find power. Somewhere, somehow. Even if I have to take it. The acceptance letter crumpled in his fist as the first seeds of a very different dream began to take root in the darkness of his room. The first week at UA passed in a haze of classes Izuku barely absorbed. His homeroom teacher, Aizawa, had made it clear from day one that this was a performance-based environment. Those who couldn't keep up would be expelled without hesitation. Izuku threw himself into the academic coursework with desperate intensity, but it was the practical exercises that slowly chipped away at what remained of his confidence. Today we'll be doing basic quirk assessment, Aizawa announced to Class 1A, his tired eyes scanning the eager faces. Show me what you can do. One by one, Izuku watched his classmates demonstrate abilities that seemed pulled from fantasy. Todoroki created massive walls of ice with casual ease. Yaoyorozu materialized complex objects from thin air. Even the smallest displays of power, Mainta's sticky spheres, Koda's animal communication, were more than Izuku could ever hope to match. When his turn came, Izuku stepped forward and threw the softball with perfect form, every muscle fiber optimized through years of training. The ball traveled exactly 67 meters. Aizawa's expression didn't change, but Izuku caught the slight shake of his head as he wrote down the score. Around him, classmates whispered. Wait, what's his quirk supposed to be? Did he even use it? Maybe it's a really weak enhancement type. Bakugo's voice cut through the murmurs like a knife. His quirk, Deku, doesn't have a fucking quirk. The silence that followed was deafening. Is that true, Midoriya? Aizawa's voice carried no judgment, but somehow that made it worse. Izuku's throat felt like sandpaper. Yes, sir. More whispers erupted, some confused, others openly mocking. Izuku caught fragments. How did he even get in? This is supposed to be the top hero course? What a waste of a slot. But it was Ieda's well-intentioned comment that hurt most. Perhaps you would be better suited for general studies. I'm sure they could accommodate a transfer. That evening, Izuku sat alone in the cafeteria, picking at his food while the other students clustered in animated groups. He tried joining conversations earlier in the week, offering his analytical insights about their quirks and potential improvements. The responses had ranged from polite disinterest to outright dismissal. Hey Deku. Izuku looked up to find Bakugo looming over his table, flanked by a few classmates who seemed more interested in the entertainment than the conversation. Kaken, Izuku's voice was carefully neutral. What do you want? Just wondering how long you plan to keep up this charade. Bakugo's red eyes glittered with familiar malice. Because everyone's starting to figure out what I've known all along, you don't belong here. I earned my place same as everyone else. The words came out weaker than Izuku intended. Bakugo laughed, the sound harsh and grating. Earned it, you scraped by on test scores because UA needed to fill some diversity quota. Face it, Deku, you're a charity case. Kirishima shifted uncomfortably. Come on, Bakugo, that's a little harsh. Harsh? Bakugo rounded on him, explosions crackling around his palms. You know what's harsh? When this quirkless wannabe gets someone killed because he couldn't keep up. When he becomes dead weight that real heroes have to carry. The cafeteria had gone quiet now, all eyes on their table. Izuku could feel the stares, the judgment, the pity that was somehow worse than the contempt. You want to know the truth about Deku? Bakugo's voice carried across the room. He's been chasing this impossible dream since we were kids, too stupid to realize he'll never be anything more than a victim for real heroes to save. Hell, he can't even save himself. The explosion, when it came, was small, barely more than a firecracker, but it was enough to singe Izuku's uniform, to leave a black mark on the table between them. Aizawa appeared as if from thin air, his capture weapon already extending toward Bakugo. Bakugo, principal's office, now. As his childhood friend was dragged away, still snarling threats, Izuku became aware of the silence pressing down on him. Every face in the cafeteria was turned his way, some sympathetic, others curious, many simply uncomfortable with the scene they'd witnessed. Uraraka approached hesitantly. Midoriya-kun, are you okay? The genuine concern in her voice almost broke him, almost. Instead, Izuku managed a shaky smile. I'm fine, really, Kaken and we have history, he'll calm down. But as he excused himself and fled to the bathroom, Izuku caught the whispered conversations starting up behind him. Did you see how he just took that? I mean, Bakugo's not wrong about the Quirk thing. Poor guy, someone should probably tell him to transfer before it gets worse. Izuku stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, taking in the small burn mark on his collar, the way his green eyes looked too bright in his pale face. His hands trembled as he gripped the sink edge. This is only the beginning, he realized with dawning horror. It's going to get worse. The next few days proved him right. Bakugo's detention had done nothing to curb his behavior. If anything, it had made him more creative in his cruelty. He'd recruited others now, students who saw Izuku as an easy target or simply wanted to stay on Bakugo's good side. During combat training, Izuku found himself paired against opponents who used just a little too much force, who took just a little too long to help him up when he was down. The teachers either didn't notice or chose not to intervene for such minor incidents. Gotta toughen up if you want to be a hero, Kaminari had said with false sympathy after accidentally electrocuting Izuku during a sparring match. In academic classes, group projects somehow never had room for him. Study groups were full whenever he asked to join. His careful analyses of hero techniques and battle strategies were dismissed as overthinking or trying too hard. The isolation was systematic, thorough, and devastatingly effective. But it was the teachers' reactions that hurt most of all. Midoriya Midnight had said after another disastrous practical exam, perhaps it's time to consider whether this path is truly suited to your unique circumstances. Present Mike had been more direct. Look, kid, I admire the determination, but sometimes knowing when to quit is the most heroic thing you can do. Even Aizawa, who Izuku had hoped might understand the value of unconventional approaches, had cornered him after class. I don't expel students lightly, the underground hero had said, his dark eyes unreadable. But I also don't coddle them. You're falling behind in every practical assessment. Your classmates don't trust you to have their backs because they're too busy worrying about yours. At what point does this stop being admirable persistence and start being dangerous delusion? That night, Izuku sat at his desk, staring at the homework he couldn't focus on completing. His phone buzzed with a message from his mother. How are classes going? You've been very quiet lately. He started to type a response 3 different times, then deleted each attempt. What could he say? That she'd been right, that All Might had been right, that every day at UA was becoming a new lesson in exactly how powerless he truly was. Instead, he set the phone aside and opened his oldest hero analysis notebook. The pages were worn soft from years of handling, filled with his younger self's observations and dreams. On the very first page, in his careful childhood handwriting, were the words, "How to become a hero like All Might." Izuku traced the letters with one finger, remembering the boy who had written them. That boy had believed anything was possible with enough heart and determination. That boy had been an idiot. A soft knock at his door interrupted his brooding. "Izuku, dinner's ready." "I'm not hungry, Mom." A pause, then, "Are you sure you're all right? You've seemed different lately." Different, that was one word for it. "I'm fine," he called back, his voice steady despite the lie. "Just tired." He heard her footsteps retreat down the hallway, and somehow that hurt too, that she'd given up so easily, that she hadn't pushed harder to make sure he was okay. But then again, when had she ever really pushed for him? Izuku closed the notebook and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. At the top he wrote, "Why Heroes Fail." For the first time in weeks, the words came easily. 3 weeks into his UA career, Izuku had developed a routine built around survival. Arrive early, leave late, eat lunch in empty classrooms, sit in the back during lectures, keep his head down, his mouth shut, and his increasingly bitter observations to himself. It was working, mostly. The outright harassment had died down to a manageable simmer of snide comments and strategic exclusion. Bakugo seemed content to let his reputation do the work now. After all, why waste energy destroying someone who was destroying himself so efficiently? But Izuku should have known that peace, however fragile, wouldn't last. The breaking point came during what should have been a routine rescue simulation. "Today's exercise will test your ability to work as a team under pressure," All Might announced to the class, his voice booming across the training ground. Even diminished as he was, his presence still commanded attention. "You'll be divided into groups of 4 to navigate a collapsed building scenario. Your objective is to rescue civilians while avoiding structural hazards." Izuku's heart sank as the teams were announced. He found himself grouped with Bakugo, Iida, and Todoroki, arguably 3 of the strongest students in the class. Under normal circumstances, it should have been an ideal team composition. These weren't normal circumstances. "Great," Bakugo muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Guess we're babysitting dead weight today." Iida adjusted his glasses, clearly uncomfortable. "Bakugo-kun, we should focus on the exercise." "The exercise?" Bakugo's laugh was sharp. "Our success rate just dropped by 75% because we've got a quirkless liability dragging us down." Todoroki remained silent, but Izuku caught the way his heterochromatic eyes assessed him with cold calculation, measuring him, finding him wanting. The simulation began, and Izuku threw himself into the role with desperate intensity. He'd memorized every rescue protocol, studied building collapse patterns, analyzed optimal search and rescue formations. His analysis was flawless, his strategic thinking sound. None of it mattered. "Deku, stay back," Bakugo snarled as they approached the first civilian dummy. "Real heroes working here." When Izuku tried to suggest a more efficient search pattern, Iida cut him off with mechanical politeness. "Thank you for your input, Midoriya-kun, but I believe we should follow standard procedure." When he attempted to help Todoroki stabilize a weakened support beam, the half-and-half students simply created an ice barrier between them. "I don't need assistance." Izuku found himself relegated to the role of observer, watching his teammates work around him as if he were invisible. And they were efficient, devastatingly so. Bakugo's explosions cleared debris, Todoroki's ice stabilized structures, and Iida's speed covered ground rapidly. "They didn't need him. They would be better without me." The thought hit like a physical blow, all the more devastating for its undeniable truth. Every calculation he'd run, every scenario he'd analyzed led to the same conclusion. His presence actively hindered the team's effectiveness. But it was what happened next that shattered what remained of his resolve. They were on the 4th floor when the real collapse happened, not part of the simulation, but an actual structural failure triggered by Bakugo's overpowered explosion. A section of the building came down in a cascade of concrete and steel, and through the chaos, Izuku heard it, a genuine scream of terror from the ground floor. Someone was actually trapped. Izuku moved without thinking, muscle memory from years of hero study driving him toward the sound. But before he could take 3 steps, Bakugo's gauntleted hand slammed into his chest, sending him crashing into the wall. "Where the hell do you think you're going?" Bakugo's eyes were wild, adrenaline and rage mixing into something dangerous. "Someone's trapped down there." "So what, you think you're gonna help?" Bakugo's voice cracked like a whip. "You'll just get in the way, same as always. Probably get yourself killed and force us to waste time saving your worthless ass instead of the people who actually matter." "Bakugo-kun," Iida started, but the explosive blonde rounded on him. Don't defend him, we all know the truth, he's dead weight, a liability. How many people are gonna die because we had to babysit the quirkless wannabe?" Through the ringing in his ears, Izuku heard Todoroki's cold voice. "He's not entirely wrong. In a real emergency, resource allocation is critical." The words hit harder than Bakugo's fist had. Coming from Todoroki, stoic, analytical Todoroki, they carried the weight of objective assessment rather than personal malice. "Even the rational ones think I'm worthless." All Might's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Teams, evacuate immediately. This is not a drill." As his teammates rushed toward the exit, Izuku remained frozen against the wall, watching them work together with fluid efficiency. No one looked back to check if he was following. No one called his name. In that moment, the last fragile thread of hope snapped. That evening, Izuku sat in his room with a decision crystallizing in his mind like ice. On his desk lay 2 items, his acceptance letter to UA and the essay he'd written weeks ago titled, "Why Heroes Fail." He read through his analysis one more time, noting the patterns he'd identified, the systemic flaws in hero society that his classmates and teachers embodied perfectly, the worship of power over character, the dismissal of those deemed lesser, the comfortable lies they told themselves about heroism being accessible to all. He'd spent his whole life believing in heroes, only to discover that heroes didn't believe in him. His phone buzzed, a message from his mother. "Late dinner tonight. There's leftover katsu in the fridge. Try to eat something." "No, how was your day?" "No, are you okay?" Just practical concern for his basic physical needs. Even his own mother had given up on caring about his emotional state. Izuku picked up a pen and began to write. "Mom, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Please don't look for me. Don't worry about me. I finally learned the lesson you and everyone else have been trying to teach me. Some dreams are just delusions and some people are meant to be failures. I'm sorry for disappointing you. I'm sorry for being a burden. I'm sorry for existing. Don't blame yourself. You were right all along. Izuku." He sealed the letter in an envelope and left it on his pillow. Then he packed a single bag with essentials, clothes, his savings, the notebook where he'd analyzed hero failures. Everything else, all the hero memorabilia and All Might posters and analysis notebooks full of hopeful dreams, he left behind. They belonged to a different person, a naive child who'd believed in fairy tales. That child was dead now. As he prepared to leave, Izuku caught sight of himself in the mirror. The boy looking back at him was hollow-eyed and pale, but there was something new there too. Something cold and calculating that reminded him disturbingly of the villains he'd studied. If I can't be a hero, he thought, shouldering his bag, then maybe it's time to find out what I can be. The apartment was silent as he slipped out the front door. His mother was working late again, or maybe avoiding coming home to deal with her disappointment of a son. Either way, she wouldn't notice he was gone until morning. UA lay behind him, a monument to everything he'd lost. Ahead stretched the dark streets of Musutafu, full of possibilities he'd never considered before. Izuku Midoriya had spent 15 years trying to become a hero. Tonight, that boy died alone in an empty apartment. What emerged onto the streets was something else entirely, something that understood the real lesson his former classmates had taught him. Power wasn't given, it was taken. And he was done asking politely. The streets of Musutafu at night were a different world from the sanitized halls of UA. Izuku wandered aimlessly for hours, his bag growing heavier with each step. The city's underbelly revealed itself gradually, the homeless camps beneath overpasses, the shuttered businesses with broken windows, the areas where even police patrols moved quickly and avoided eye contact. By the time exhaustion forced him to stop, he'd traveled deep into a district he'd only heard whispered about in news reports. The kind of place where quirked criminals operated openly and heroes rarely ventured alone. He found shelter in an abandoned convenience store, its windows boarded up and covered in graffiti tags he didn't recognize. The interior reeked of mold and decay, but it was dry and hidden from the street. Izuku curled up behind the empty counter, using his bag as a pillow. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by the sounds of the city, sirens in the distance, shouting from nearby alleys, the occasional explosion that might have been a villain fight or might have been something worse. When dawn broke, so did the reality of his situation. I have nowhere to go. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt oddly liberating. For the first time in his life, he was completely free from expectations. No mother to disappoint, no classmates to burden, no teachers to convince of his worth. He was nothing, and maybe that was exactly what he needed to be. Well, what do we have here? Izuku's head snapped up to find three figures silhouetted in the broken doorway. The leader was a tall man with scarred hands and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His companions flanked him, one a woman whose arms seemed to shimmer like liquid mercury, the other a hulking brute whose skin appeared to be made of living stone. Lost little lamb wandered into the wrong neighborhood, the scarred man continued, stepping closer. His voice carried an odd gentleness that made Izuku's skin crawl. This is private property, kid, specifically our property. Izuku scrambled to his feet, bag clutched against his chest. I'm sorry, I didn't know, I'll leave. Oh, but leaving's not so simple. The woman's voice was liquid smooth, like her arms. You see, you've seen us now, seen this place. That makes you either very useful or very dangerous. The stone-skinned brute cracked his knuckles with sounds like breaking concrete. Boss, why don't we just... Patience, Rockslide, the leader raised one scarred hand. Let's not be hasty. Tell me, boy, what's a clean-looking kid like you doing sleeping rough in villain territory? Something in the man's tone made Izuku look up properly for the first time. What he saw wasn't the mindless cruelty he'd expected, but calculating intelligence. This wasn't some street thug, this was someone who thought before he acted. Izuku's voice cracked. I left home. Ran away, the woman Mercury maybe, laughed. From mommy and daddy, how tragic. But the leader held up a hand, studying Izuku with new interest. No, not ran away, left, there's a difference. He crouched down to Izuku's eye level. What's your name, kid? Izuku Midoriya. Well, Izuku Midoriya, I'm sensei. The name was clearly false, but Izuku didn't challenge it. These are my associates, Mercury and Rockslide, and you have the look of someone who's been betrayed. The words hit closer to home than Izuku was comfortable with. What do you want? The better question, Sensei said, settling back on his haunches, is what do you want? Because in my experience, kids who end up in places like this aren't running from something so much as to something. Izuku's throat tightened. I don't know. Liar, the word was said without heat. You know exactly what you want, you just don't want to say it out loud because it scares you. For a long moment, they stared at each other in silence. Finally, Izuku whispered, I want them to pay. Sensei's smile was sharp as a blade. Now we're getting somewhere, them. The heroes, the teachers, everyone who looked at me and decided I wasn't worth saving. The words poured out like poison from an infected wound. They threw me away like garbage, so maybe it's time they learned what garbage can do when it stops trying to be clean. Mercury whistled low. Kid's got some darkness in him after all. Indeed, Sensei stood, brushing dust from his coat. Tell me, Izuku, have you ever heard of the League of Villains? Of course, there, Izuku stopped, pieces clicking together. You're recruiting me. Smart boy, Sensei's approval felt warm in a way that made Izuku hate himself. We're always looking for promising young minds who understand that hero society is built on lies. People who have seen behind the curtain and found nothing but rot. I don't have a quirk, Izuku said flatly. What use could I possibly be? Ah, but that's where you're wrong, Sensei's eyes glittered. Tell me, what do you know about late manifesting quirks? Izuku blinked there, rare, usually happen due to extreme stress or trauma, but the window typically closes by age 5. Typically, sensei leaned forward, but not always, especially not for those with unique circumstances. What are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes the strongest powers lie dormant until the right catalyst awakens them. Pain, anger, desperation, these can be powerful motivators for evolution. Izuku felt something cold settle in his stomach. You think I might develop a quirk? I think, Sensei said carefully, that you've spent your entire life suppressing your true nature in service of an impossible dream. What happens when someone like you finally stops holding back, when they embrace what they really are instead of what they wish they could be? The abandoned store fell silent except for the distant sounds of the city waking up. Izuku stared at his hands, wondering if there was truth in the villain's words or if this was just another manipulation. But what did it matter? He had nowhere else to go. What would you want from me? He asked quietly. For now, survival, learn to live in the shadows, to move unseen, to think like we think. Consider it an education in reality. Sensei extended one scarred hand. The question is, are you ready to learn what the world is really like beneath all those pretty hero lies? Izuku looked at the offered hand. He thought of All Might's crushing dismissal, of Bakugo's explosions, of his mother's tired disappointment. He thought of classmates who stepped over him like he was debris, of teachers who saw him as a problem to be solved. They made their choice, he realized. They chose to throw me away. Now I get to choose what I become. He reached out and grasped Sensei's hand. Good boy, the villain murmured, and his grip was surprisingly gentle. Welcome to your real education, Izuku Midoriya. I think you're going to learn things here that no hero school could ever teach you. As they led him deeper into the city's shadows, Izuku felt something twist in his chest, not hope exactly, but something sharper, more dangerous. Purpose. For the first time since leaving UA, he smiled. The League of Villains hideout was nothing like the grand lairs Izuku had imagined from hero documentaries. It was a repurposed warehouse in the industrial district, its concrete walls stained with years of neglect and its windows painted black to block prying eyes. The interior had been divided into functional spaces, a common area with mismatched furniture, sleeping quarters that were little more than curtained alcoves, and a central meeting room dominated by a massive table covered in maps and photographs. Home sweet home, Mercury said with obvious sarcasm as she led Izuku through the space. Not exactly the Ritz, but it keeps the heroes out. Other members drifted through the shadows like ghosts, a woman whose body seemed to be made of living smoke, a man whose fingers ended in wicked claws, someone whose face was hidden behind a mask of shifting shadows. They watched Izuku with calculating eyes, assessing the newcomer with the cold professionalism of predators. They're wondering if you're worth the risk, Sensei explained, settling into a chair that might have once been expensive. Taking in strays is dangerous business. People talk, make mistakes, lead heroes to our door. I won't. No, you won't. The certainty in Sensei's voice was absolute. Because you understand what they don't yet, that you have nowhere else to go. No family to run to, no friends to shelter you, no heroes to save you. We are your only option for survival. The words should have stung. Instead, they felt like absolution. Over the next few days, Izuku learned the rhythms of villain life. It was surprisingly mundane. They ate together, shared responsibilities, even had what could generously be called inside jokes. But beneath the surface civility ran currents of violence and calculated cruelty that kept everyone on edge. First lesson, Sensei explained during one of their private talks, is understanding power dynamics. Heroes believe in hierarchies based on merit and nobility. We believe in hierarchies based on usefulness and loyalty. Guess which one reflects actual human nature? Izuku found himself adapting faster than he'd expected. The analytical skills that had made him an outcast at UA served him well here. He learned names, quirks, personal histories, and most importantly, the web of alliances and resentments that held the group together. Kids got good instincts, he overheard Mercury telling Rockslide after his first week. Stays quiet, pays attention, doesn't ask stupid questions. Still don't see why boss is wasting time on him, Rockslide grumbled. No quirk, no muscle, no connections, what's the point? That night, Sensei found Izuku sitting alone in the warehouse's makeshift library, a collection of stolen books, villain manifestos, and detailed analyses of hero weaknesses. "Doubting yourself already?" the villain asked, settling beside him. "Rockslide's not wrong," Izuku said quietly. "I can't contribute anything meaningful to operations. I'm just dead weight." "Is that what you think?" Sensei's laugh was soft but sharp. "Tell me, what did you observe during today's planning session?" Izuku straightened, his analytical mind automatically organizing information. "Toga wants to target the hero Ingenium because of her obsession with blood types, but she's letting emotion override strategy. Mercury thinks we should hit smaller heroes first to build reputation, but she's underestimating the response escalation. Dabai wants maximum property damage regardless of strategic value because he has personal issues with." "Enough," Sensei held up a hand, but he was smiling. "And what would you have suggested?" "Hit a hero who's powerful enough to matter but isolated enough to avoid massive retaliation. Someone with a weakness we can exploit and a reputation that would make their fall meaningful." Izuku paused. "Someone like Eraserhead actually. Underground hero, works alone, known for taking down quirk-based villains. If we could prove his methods don't work against proper planning." "Go on." "His quirk requires line of sight and has limits on multiple targets. A coordinated attack using environmental obstacles and non-quirk weapons would neutralize his primary advantage. The psychological impact of defeating the villain killer would be enormous, but the response would be measured since he's not a public-facing hero." Sensei was quiet for a long moment, then, "Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But I still can't." "Can't what? Fight? Neither can I, not directly. My quirk is more administrative." Sensei's eyes glittered in the dim light. "The strongest villains aren't always the ones with the flashiest powers, Izuku. Sometimes they're the ones who can see the whole board while everyone else is focused on their next move." That night, Izuku lay in his narrow cot and felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Useful. Not tolerated, not pitied, but genuinely valued for his mind rather than dismissed for his lack of power. It was 3 weeks into his stay when everything changed. The mission had gone wrong from the start. What should have been a simple robbery had turned into a running battle through downtown Musutafu when Kamui Woods and MT Lady had shown up earlier than expected. Izuku watched from the van as Toga and Dabai fought a retreating action, their coordination falling apart under pressure. "They're going to get caught," he told Sensei urgently. "Toga's too aggressive and Dabai's not covering her flanks properly." Indeed, Sensei's voice was calm despite the chaos playing out before them. "What would you do?" Izuku's mind raced, calculating angles and probabilities. The construction site, if they could get to the crane, they could use the height advantage too. "Tell them..." "What?" "You have a communicator, tell them what you see." Izuku's hands shook as he activated the device. "Toga, construction site 2 blocks north, use the crane for elevation and sightlines." "Who is this?" Toga's voice crackled with static and adrenaline. "It's Midoriya, trust me." A pause, then Dabai, you heard him, north. What happened next unfolded like a perfect chess game. Izuku guided them through the urban maze, using his encyclopedic knowledge of the city and hero response patterns to keep them one step ahead of pursuit. When MT Lady tried to cut them off at the construction site, he directed Dabai to target specific support beams. When Kamui Woods attempted to trap them with his branches, he identified the blind spots in the hero's positioning. Left side 30 meters, he can't maintain his grip while dodging. Now. Toga's gleeful laughter echoed through the calm as she slipped past Kamui's defenses, her knife finding the gaps in his wooden armor. They escaped clean, vanishing into the underground tunnels Izuku had memorized from old city planning documents. The warehouse celebration that night was different from the usual post-mission decompression. There was electricity in the air, a sense that something fundamental had shifted. "Kids got tactical sense," Dabai admitted grudgingly, his usual hostility replaced by something approaching respect. "Better than tactical sense," Toga added, her eyes bright with dangerous excitement. "He thinks like us now." But it was later, when the others had drifted away to their quarters, that Izuku felt it happen. He was analyzing the mission in his notebook, documenting what had worked and what could be improved, when pain lanced through his skull like lightning. He doubled over, pressing his palms against his temples as his vision blurred. "What's happening to me?" Images flashed behind his eyes, not memories, but something else. Dabai's blue flames, Toga's transformation, Mercury's liquid form. The sensations were vivid, immediate, as if he'd experienced them himself. And then, impossible as it seemed, he had. A small flame flickered to life in his palm, not his own power, but Dabai's, channeled through some mechanism he didn't understand. It lasted only seconds before guttering out, but it was undeniably real. "Sensei," his voice came out as a whisper. The villain leader appeared beside him as if he'd been waiting, feeling something new. Izuku stared at his hand. "How?" "Stress is a powerful catalyst," Sensei said gently. "Your body, your mind, your very soul has been under tremendous pressure for weeks. Sometimes that pressure creates diamonds. But quirks don't just appear, evolve, change." Sensei's smile was paternal and terrifying. "My dear boy, quirks are expressions of human will made manifest, and you have spent your entire life willing yourself to have power." Izuku flexed his fingers, searching for the sensation again. For a moment, he thought he felt something, an echo of Mercury's fluidity, a ghost of Rockslide's durability. "What does this mean?" "It means," Sensei said, settling into the chair across from him, "that your real education is about to begin. Tell me, Izuku, how much do you know about quirk theory, specifically the interaction between observer and observed, between desire and manifestation?" Izuku's analytical mind seized on the implications. "You're saying I can copy other people's quirks?" "I'm saying you might be capable of something far more interesting than simple copying." Sensei's eyes glinted in the darkness. "After all, what good is mimicry when you could have synthesis?" As if responding to his thoughts, Izuku felt the power stir again, not one quirk, but fragments of several, swirling together in patterns he was only beginning to understand. For the first time since leaving UA, he felt genuinely powerful. And it was intoxicating. The weeks that followed Izuku's awakening blurred together in a haze of discovery and transformation. His quirk, because it was undeniably a quirk now, whatever Sensei called it, operated on principles that defied everything he'd learned about power systems. Unlike simple copying, which would have been remarkable enough, his ability seemed to understand the quirks it encountered, breaking them down into component parts and rebuilding them according to his needs. "It's not mimicry," he explained to Sensei during one of their late-night training sessions, small flames dancing between his fingers in patterns that belonged to neither Dabai nor Endeavor. "It's more like translation. I see how their power works and then I make it work for me." "Show me," Sensei commanded. Izuku closed his eyes, reaching for the sensations he'd cataloged over the past month. Dabai's flames, but filtered through his understanding of Bakugo's explosive control. The result was fire that moved like liquid, flowing around his arms in controlled spirals before erupting outward in precisely targeted bursts. When he opened his eyes, Sensei was smiling. "Magnificent, and this is from just 2 encounters." "3, actually," Izuku extinguished the flames with a thought. "There's some element of Endeavor's technique in there too, from old video footage. Once I understand the underlying mechanics, direct exposure isn't always necessary." "Interesting," Sensei made a note in his ever-present journal. "What about the others? Toga's transformation, Mercury's fluid form?" Izuku nodded, and his skin rippled like water before solidifying into something that looked like living stone, Rockslide's durability combined with Mercury's adaptability. The more complex the quirk, the longer it takes to fully synthesize. Toga's transformation is still fragmentary. I can change my appearance, but not my whole body chemistry. Yet, Izuku agreed. It was intoxicating in ways he hadn't expected. Not just the power itself, though that was remarkable enough, but the respect it earned him. Villains who had barely acknowledged his existence now sought his advice on strategy and technique. His analyses were implemented without question, his tactical suggestions followed with eager precision. For the first time in his life, people listened to him. The first real test came when Sensei assigned him to his first official operation. "Nothing too ambitious," the villain leader explained as he spread photos across the table. "A simple smash and grab at a hero supply depot, the kind of thing we do to maintain funding and gather intelligence." Izuku studied the target, a warehouse complex on the outskirts of the city, officially listed as storing miscellaneous support equipment, but actually housing experimental hero gear and confiscated villain weapons. "Security?" he asked. Automated systems mostly, with a skeleton crew of guards, should be routine. But Izuku's instincts, honed by months of analyzing hero patterns, suggested otherwise. Sir, this feels wrong. The location is too convenient, the security too light for what they're supposedly storing. Meaning either the intelligence is wrong or this is a trap. Sensei's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. And if it is a trap, then we spring it on our terms instead of theirs. The mission team consisted of Izuku, Dabai, Toga, and a newer recruit called Spinner, a lizard mutation villain with an unhealthy obsession with the hero killer stain. As they approached the warehouse, Izuku felt his borrowed senses expand, fragments of quirks he'd encountered painting a detailed picture of their surroundings. Two heroes, southwest corner, he whispered into his comm. Probably Kamui woods based on the wood scent. The other, electrical signature, suggests Kaminari. The UA brat, Dabai's voice carried interest and contempt in equal measure. This should be fun. No, Izuku's voice was sharp with authority he was still learning to wield. We stick to the plan, in and out, no unnecessary engagement. But plans, as Izuku was learning, rarely survived contact with reality. The warehouse was indeed a trap, but not the kind any of them had expected. Instead of heroes lying in wait, they found themselves walking into what could only be described as a recruitment interview. Welcome, Midoriya. The voice came from the shadows, and when its owner stepped into the light, Izuku felt his breath catch. Tall and imposing, with silver hair and a presence that seemed to warp the air around him, the figure was unmistakably one of the most dangerous villains in Japan. All for one. You've been making quite an impression, the ancient villain continued, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. Sensei speaks very highly of your potential. Izuku's mind raced. Sensei was connected to All for One. The implications were staggering, but before he could process them fully, the warehouse erupted into chaos. Heroes burst through every entrance, not just Kamui Woods and Kaminari, but a full response team led by someone Izuku recognized with a sick twist in his stomach. All Might. Young Midoriya, the symbol of peace's voice carried across the warehouse like thunder. It doesn't have to end this way. Surrender peacefully and we can discuss rehabilitation. Rehabilitation, the word tore from Izuku's throat like a curse. You think I need to be fixed? His power surged, fragments of every quirk he'd encountered weaving together into something unprecedented. Fire and stone and liquid metal, speed and strength and transformation, all flowing through him in patterns that defied classification. I'm not broken, he snarled, and his voice carried harmonics that belonged to a dozen different people. I'm evolved. The battle that followed was nothing like the careful, strategic engagements he'd planned. It was raw and visceral and personal, every strike aimed not just at victory, but at proving a point. When Kamui Woods tried to restrain him with wooden bonds, Izuku burned through them with blue fire hot enough to melt steel. When All Might charged with his devastating strength, Izuku met him with stone skin that absorbed the impact and redirected it through the floor. When other heroes tried to coordinate attacks, he moved like liquid mercury, flowing between their strikes with impossible grace. Stop this madness, All Might roared, his form blazing with power. You're better than this. No, Izuku replied, his voice eerily calm despite the destruction around them. I'm exactly what you made me. The fight might have continued indefinitely, but All for One had other plans. Enough, the ancient villain said, and reality seemed to hiccup around his words. We have what we came for. The retreat was as coordinated as their arrival had been chaotic. Smoke filled the warehouse, concealing their escape routes. By the time it cleared, the villains had vanished like shadows, leaving behind only property damage and shaken heroes. Back at the hideout, Izuku sat in stunned silence as the implications of the evening sank in. You did well, Sensei said, settling beside him with 2 cups of tea. Better than well, actually. You've proven yourself capable of facing your former idol on equal terms. Equal terms? Izuku laughed, but there was no humor in it. I barely held my own, and only because I had backup. For now, but your power grows stronger every day, fed by purpose and refined by necessity. Sensei sipped his tea thoughtfully. Tell me, how did it feel, facing All Might not as a fan seeking approval, but as an equal demanding respect? Izuku considered the question, replaying the battle in his mind. He remembered the shock in All Might's eyes when his attacks failed to immediately overwhelm the quirkless boy he'd dismissed. The growing concern as Izuku matched him blow for blow. The moment of genuine fear when he realized that his words no longer carried the power to break spirits. It felt, Izuku paused, searching for the right word. It felt like justice. Good, hold on to that feeling, nurture it. Sensei set down his cup and fixed Izuku with an intense stare. Because what happened tonight was just the beginning. All for One has taken an interest in your development, and that opens doors we hadn't dared hope for. What kind of doors? The kind that lead to real power. The kind that let you reshape the world according to your vision instead of accepting the scraps others deign to offer you. Later, alone in his quarters, Izuku studied his reflection in the cracked mirror mounted on his wall. The boy looking back at him bore little resemblance to the broken child who'd fled UA months ago. His eyes held depths they hadn't possessed before, and his stance carried a confidence born of genuine strength. More importantly, he was no longer trying to be someone else's idea of a hero. He was becoming something entirely new. In his notebook, no longer filled with hero analysis but with plans and contingencies and power applications, he wrote a single line. The problem with heroes isn't that they're strong, it's that they're weak where it matters most. Tomorrow, he would begin phase 2 of his education. Tonight, he would savor the memory of All Might's shocked expression when faced with the monster his indifference had created. 6 months after his first encounter with All Might as an enemy, Izuku had become something the hero world wasn't prepared for. He stood on the rooftop overlooking downtown Musutafu, watching the city's lights twinkle like stars beneath him. But where once he might have seen beauty, now he saw weaknesses, patrol routes that left gaps, response times that could be exploited, heroes who followed predictable patterns born of arrogance and routine. The erasure hero will be along the Eastern District in approximately 12 minutes, he spoke into his earpiece, his voice carrying the calm authority that had become his trademark. Vlad King is handling a hostage situation in Sector 7, won't be available for backup for at least 30 minutes. MT Lady is off duty, and Camus Woods is still recovering from our last encounter. Copy that, Synthesis, came Toga's gleeful response. She'd started using his villain name with obvious delight, relishing how it made the hero's expressions twist with confusion and fear. Synthesis, the name had emerged naturally from his evolved abilities, no longer merely copying quirks but breaking them down and rebuilding them into something uniquely his own. The Hero Commission had spent weeks trying to classify his power, eventually settling on the inadequate designation of unknown class S threat. They still didn't understand what they were facing. Tonight's operation was ambitious even by their current standards. A coordinated strike on 3 hero agencies simultaneously, designed to steal classified intelligence while demonstrating the League's growing capabilities. But more than that, it was a message, a declaration that the old rules no longer applied. Dabai status report, Izuku commanded, his enhanced senses tracking heat signatures throughout the city. Target building secured, these fucking heroes really need better security systems. Dabai's voice carried satisfaction and barely controlled violence. Found their files on Quirk suppression research. Figured you'd want to see this shit. Excellent, Spinner. South Agency is a bust, too many civilians in the area. Abort. Izuku closed his eyes, his power reaching out to touch the edges of a dozen different quirks he'd encountered over the months. Enhanced hearing from a bat mutation villain, electromagnetic perception from a support course dropout, even fragments of analysis abilities he'd somehow absorbed from watching hero students work. Negative, Crowd Control Protocol 7. Use the underground maintenance tunnels, there's an entrance in the subway station 2 blocks west. How do you even know that? Spinner's amazement was audible. I know everything about this city, Izuku replied, and it wasn't boastfulness, it was simple fact. He'd spent months studying every map, every building plan, every piece of public infrastructure. Knowledge was power, and he'd accumulated both with methodical precision. The third target, his personal objective, lay before him like a gift wrapped in steel and concrete. The All Might Agency, the symbol of peace's personal headquarters, gleaming with the kind of ostentatious heroic symbolism that had once filled him with awe. Now it just looked like a monument to hypocrisy. Phase 1, he thought, stepping off the rooftop. His descent was controlled by a synthesis of quirks that shouldn't have been able to work together. Gravity manipulation borrowed from Uraraka, observed during the sports festival broadcasts, combined with wind control from a villain he'd encountered last month, steadied by the enhanced proprioception he'd developed from studying Iida's movements. He landed silently in the agency's courtyard, invisible to the security cameras thanks to a light-bending ability he'd reverse-engineered from analyzing stealth heroes' techniques. The entry was almost disappointingly easy. All Might's agency relied on the assumption that no villain would be bold enough to attack it directly, a blind spot born of decades of unquestioned supremacy. They were learning how dangerous assumptions could be. Izuku moved through the building like a ghost, his enhanced senses mapping every corridor, every room, every potential threat. The night's security was minimal: 3 guards, 2 hero interns, and 1 tired-looking support technician monitoring systems that hadn't detected a real intrusion in years. He disabled them all without raising an alarm. Not killed, he wasn't that far gone yet, but neutralized with precise application of sleep-inducing compounds synthesized from studying a minor villain's knockout gas quirk. The real treasure lay in All Might's personal office. Files, correspondence, meeting notes, a complete picture of how the hero establishment really operated behind its public facade. Izuku photographed everything, his enhanced memory storing details that would prove invaluable in future operations. But it was the last file that made him pause. Subject: Midoriya Izuku. Status: missing person, potential villain recruit. His own face stared back at him from a surveillance photo, not the broken boy who'd fled UA, but the confident young man he'd become. The file was thick, filled with psychological profiles, tactical assessments, and what looked like contingency plans for rehabilitation or neutralization. "Still trying to save me," he murmured, flipping through pages of analysis that painted him as either a victim to be rescued or a threat to be eliminated. Or destroy me, you can't seem to decide which. One document made him freeze. A psychological evaluation signed by UA's guidance counselor, painting his descent into villainy as the predictable result of underlying instability and delusional hero complex syndrome. They're rewriting history, he realized with cold clarity, making themselves the victims of my inevitable breakdown instead of acknowledging their role in creating me. The rage that followed wasn't the hot, desperate anger of his youth. This was something colder, more refined, the fury of someone who understood exactly how the world worked and had decided to burn it down with scientific precision. His calm crackled to life. Synthesis: we've got problems, heroes incoming, multiple signatures, someone triggered a silent alarm. Izuku smiled, sliding the files into his bag with calm efficiency. Let them come, it's time for a field test. When All Might burst through the office door 3 minutes later, he found Izuku sitting calmly in the hero's own chair, reading through classified documents with obvious interest. "Midoriya," All Might's voice carried pain and disappointment in equal measure. "I hoped we could avoid this." "Did you?" Izuku looked up, his green eyes reflecting light in ways that seemed almost predatory. "Because this file suggests you've been planning for exactly this scenario for months." "Those are contingencies." "These are execution orders." Izuku held up a document marked with All Might's signature. "Authorization for lethal force if I'm deemed too dangerous for standard capture." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Still protecting people from the quirkless boy, I see." All Might stepped into the room, his imposing form filling the doorway. But where once that presence would have inspired awe, now Izuku felt only analytical interest. Muscle form maintained for approximately 43 minutes in his current state. Injury to left side still causing compensation patterns. Reaction time decreased by roughly 12% since our last encounter. "You don't have to do this," All Might said, his voice gentler now. "Whatever drove you to this path, whatever pain you're carrying, we can find another way." "Can we?" Izuku stood, his movements fluid and controlled. "Tell me, All Might, when exactly did you plan to offer me that other way? When I was begging you for a chance at UA? When I was being torn apart by classmates who saw me as dead weight? When I was sleeping on the streets because my own mother couldn't bear to look at her failure of a son?" Each word hit like a physical blow, and Izuku could see All Might flinch with every accusation. You had dozens of chances to save me, Izuku continued, power beginning to gather around him like a visible aura. Instead, you chose to crush what little hope I had left, so forgive me if I don't trust your sudden concern for my well-being. I made mistakes. You made choices. The temperature in the room began to rise as Izuku's synthesized fire quirk responded to his emotions. And now you get to live with the consequences. The battle that erupted was nothing like their previous encounter, where before Izuku had fought defensively, scrambling to match All Might's overwhelming power, now he fought with calculated precision. He'd spent months studying the symbol of peace, analyzing every recorded fight, every interview, every public appearance. He knew All Might's patterns better than the hero knew them himself. When All Might charged with his devastating right hook, Izuku was already moving, not away but into the attack, his body shifting to liquid metal that absorbed and redirected the kinetic energy. The force that should have shattered concrete instead flowed through him harmlessly, redirected into the building's infrastructure in precisely calculated patterns. Impossible, All Might breathed, staring at his fist embedded in what had been solid steel a moment before. Nothing's impossible, Izuku replied, his form solidifying back into human shape. You just need to understand the underlying principles. He demonstrated with a casual gesture, his synthesized quirks weaving together in patterns that defied conventional understanding. Fire became solid, metal became gas, gravity became negotiable. Each application was small, precise, and utterly beyond anything All Might had encountered. What have you become? The question carried genuine horror, and Izuku found himself smiling. I've become what you taught me to be, he said, launching into an attack that combined elements from a dozen different fighting styles. Someone who takes what they need instead of waiting for permission. The fight raged through the agency's upper floors, each exchange more devastating than the last. But unlike their previous encounter, this time Izuku wasn't just holding his own, he was winning. All Might's movements were growing sluggish, his legendary stamina finally meeting its match against an opponent who seemed to have limitless variations of power at his disposal. Every strategy the hero employed was countered with surgical precision, every advantage neutralized by abilities that shouldn't have been able to work together. You're not fighting me, All Might realized, breathing hard as steam began to rise from his overheated body. You're fighting yourself, using me as a proxy for all your pain and anger. Very perceptive, Izuku's voice was conversational despite the destruction around them. But you're wrong about one thing, I'm not angry anymore. Anger is unproductive, inefficient. What I am is purposeful. To demonstrate, he shifted tactics entirely. Instead of the flashy, overwhelming assaults All Might expected, Izuku became surgical. A touch here to disrupt the hero's breathing, a strike there to aggravate old injuries. Death by 1,000 cuts, each one calculated for maximum effectiveness. The problem with heroes, Izuku explained as he worked, is that you're all so focused on dramatic gestures that you miss the details. You see the fire and ice, the explosions and transformations, but you never ask why they work. All Might stumbled, his muscle form flickering as his time limit approached. I asked why, Izuku continued, pressing his advantage. I studied, I analyzed, I understood, and understanding, it turns out, is the greatest power of all. When All Might finally collapsed, his iconic form shrinking back to the skeletal figure of Toshinori Yagi, Izuku felt nothing resembling satisfaction. This wasn't victory, it was simply the inevitable result of superior preparation meeting inferior execution. This doesn't end anything, All Might wheezed, blood flecking his lips. Others will come, better heroes, smarter ones, they'll stop you. Will they? Izuku crouched beside his fallen idol, his expression almost gentle. Because I've been studying them too, and what I've learned is that they're all just variations on the same theme, powerful people who have never had to question their assumptions about how the world works. He stood, gathering the scattered files with methodical efficiency. Give them a message for me, he said as sirens wailed in the distance. Tell them that the age of heroes operating on blind faith is over. From now on, they're dealing with someone who knows. As he prepared to leave, All Might's voice stopped him. Midoriya, Izuku, it doesn't have to be this way, you could still. Still what? Come back! Izuku looked back over his shoulder, his green eyes reflecting the emergency lights flooding through the broken windows. Come back to what? A world that sees me as broken, a system that threw me away the moment I became inconvenient. He smiled, and it was the saddest thing All Might had ever seen. You're right about one thing, this doesn't end anything, it's just the beginning. Tonight, 3 agencies fell simultaneously. Tomorrow, it might be 5. Next week, who knows? The heroes will adapt. The heroes will try to adapt, Izuku corrected. But adaptation requires understanding, and understanding requires admitting that your fundamental assumptions might be wrong. How many heroes do you think are capable of that level of intellectual honesty? As he vanished into the night, leaving behind a broken agency and a shattered symbol, Izuku felt the pieces of his larger plan clicking into place. Tonight had been about gathering intelligence and testing capabilities. Tomorrow would be about something far more important, forcing the hero world to confront the monster their indifference had created. By the time they realized what they were truly facing, it would be far too late to stop him. The aftermath of the triple agency raids sent shockwaves through hero society that reached far beyond the immediate damage. Katsuki Bakugo stood in the wreckage of All Might's agency, his red eyes taking in the surgical precision of the destruction. Every broken window, every shattered wall, every disabled security system spoke of an intelligence that operated on levels he was only beginning to comprehend. Bastard didn't even try to hide his work, he muttered, kneeling beside scorch marks that formed an almost artistic pattern across the floor. The flames had burned at temperatures that should have melted steel, but they'd been controlled with such precision that a paper document lay untouched mere inches away. Actually, I think that was the point. Bakugo turned to find Todoroki approaching, his heterochromatic eyes reflecting the emergency lights that still bathed the scene. The half-and-half bastard looked as composed as ever, but there was something different in his expression, a crack in that perfect emotional control. What do you mean? Look at the pattern of destruction. Todoroki gestured to the devastation around them. Nothing random, nothing wasteful, every action served a specific purpose. He wanted us to see exactly what he's capable of. Deku's not that calculating. Isn't he? The voice belonged to Ida, who emerged from the elevator shaft looking haggard. His usually pristine appearance was disheveled, his precise movements carrying an unusual hesitancy. We've been operating under the assumption that Midoriya is still the boy we knew at UA, but that boy wouldn't have been capable of this. Bakugo's hands clenched into fists, small explosions crackling between his fingers. He's still Deku, still the same quirkless wannabe who defeated All Might in single combat. Todoroki's words cut through Bakugo's denial like ice. Who coordinated simultaneous strikes on 3 heavily defended targets. Who's been systematically dismantling hero operations for 6 months while we pretended he was just another villain to be captured. The silence that followed was broken by the approach of heavy footsteps. All Might, or rather, Toshinori Yagi in his skeletal true form, appeared in the doorway, supported by Recovery Girl and looking like he'd aged a decade in a single night. Young Bakugo, he said, his voice carrying none of its usual confidence. I need to ask you some questions. About what? About Midoriya, about what happened before he left UA. Bakugo felt something cold settle in his stomach. Why? All Might's hollow eyes fixed on him with uncomfortable intensity. Because tonight, he told me things about how he was treated, about what drove him to this path, and I'm beginning to understand that we missed something crucial. Recovery Girl stepped forward, her expression grim. The psychological profile we've been using assumes his turn to villainy was sudden, triggered by some external trauma. But what if it wasn't sudden at all? What if it was gradual, systematic? What are you saying? Ida's voice carried a note of dread. I'm saying, All Might replied slowly, that we need to examine our own actions very carefully, because if we're responsible for creating this situation. We're not responsible for anything. Bakugo's explosion lit up the room, his anger flaring hot and defensive. Deku made his choice, he chose to become a villain. Did he? Todoroki's question was quiet but devastating. Or did we make it for him? The accusation hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. Across the city, in an apartment that had once been home to a hopeful boy with impossible dreams, Inko Midoriya sat surrounded by the remnants of her son's abandoned life. Hero merchandise covered every surface: figurines, posters, analysis notebooks filled with careful observations and detailed breakdowns of professional techniques. The bedroom looked like a shrine to heroic idealism, preserved exactly as Izuku had left it months ago. But tonight, for the first time since his disappearance, Inko was really looking at what he'd left behind. The acceptance letter to UA, crumpled and forgotten on his desk. A notebook filled with costume designs and hero names that would never be used. Most damning of all, a half-finished essay titled "What Makes a Hero?" with increasingly frustrated revisions scrawled in the margins. "Heroes Save People" had been crossed out and replaced with "Heroes Save People Who Matter." "Anyone can be heroic" had become "Only the strong matter in the end." "Never give up on your dreams" was completely scratched out, the paper torn where he'd pressed too hard with his pen. How had she missed the despair bleeding through every line? Her phone buzzed with another call from the police. They'd been checking in daily since the raids, officially for her protection but really to monitor whether her son might try to contact her. She let it go to voicemail just like all the others. What could she tell them? That she'd failed as a mother so completely that she'd driven her own child into the arms of villains. That she'd been so wrapped up in her own fears and disappointments that she'd never noticed her son slowly dying inside. That she'd looked at her baby boy and seen only failure. The truth was too horrible to voice, so she sat in silence among the artifacts of dreams she'd helped destroy, and finally, far too late, began to cry. At UA, Principal Nezu sat in his office reviewing footage from the night's attacks with mechanical precision. His enhanced intelligence had already identified 17 different tactical innovations in the villain's approach, each one representing a significant evolution in criminal methodology. But it was the psychological warfare aspects that truly concerned him. "He's not just attacking heroes," he murmured to his empty office, replaying footage of the symbol of peace's defeat. "He's attacking the idea of heroes. Every operation is designed to demonstrate that our fundamental assumptions are flawed." A soft knock interrupted his analysis. "Come in." Aizawa entered, looking more exhausted than usual. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usual scarf hung limp around his shoulders. "Any insights?" Nezu asked. "Too many." Aizawa settled into the chair across from the principal's desk. "I've been reviewing Midoriya's academic records, comparing them to his current operational patterns. The tactical thinking, the strategic planning, the analytical approach, it's all there. We just never bothered to notice." "Explain." "Every essay he wrote, every project he submitted, every question he asked in class, they all demonstrated advanced understanding of hero work at a systemic level. But we dismissed it as theoretical knowledge from a boy who could never put it into practice." Nezu's paws stilled on his teacup. "You're saying we underestimated him?" "I'm saying we ignored him. Worse, we actively discouraged him." Aizawa's voice carried self-recrimination that Nezu had rarely heard from the stoic underground hero. "Do you know how many times he approached faculty members with strategic insights that could have improved our curriculum? How many suggestions he made that were dismissed because he was quirkless?" "How many?" 47 documented instances in his brief time here. 47 times a brilliant analytical mind tried to contribute to hero education, and 47 times he was told his input wasn't valuable because he lacked physical power. The implications settled over them like a shroud. "There's something else," Aizawa continued. "I've been analyzing his recent attacks, trying to identify the quirks he's been using. The combination patterns, the synthesis techniques, they're not random. He's been studying specific heroes and students, learning from direct observation." "Which heroes?" "All of them, but especially," Aizawa hesitated, then pushed forward, "especially his former classmates. The quirk combinations he's demonstrating suggest he's been watching UA students for months, possibly since he left." Nezu felt a chill run down his spine. "You think he's been monitoring the school?" "I think he's been studying us the same way he studied heroes when he was a fan. The difference is, now he's looking for weaknesses instead of inspiration." Before Nezu could respond, his computer chimed with an incoming priority message. The sender was listed as SYNTHSIS. The message contained a single line of text and an attached video file. "You wanted to see what a quirkless boy could become. Now you know. Next lesson begins tomorrow. I am." The video, when they played it, showed crystal clear footage of the knight's attacks from multiple angles, including several that should have been impossible to achieve without inside knowledge of hero response protocols. But it was the final frame that made Nezu's blood run cold, a perfect view of UA's faculty meeting from earlier that evening, recorded from an angle that suggested the camera had been placed inside the supposedly secure conference room. He'd been watching them all along. In the depths of the League's hideout, Izuku sat before a wall of monitors displaying news coverage from the night's operations. Every major network was running the story, their anchors struggling to explain how a coordinated villain attack had succeeded so completely. Public confidence in heroes down 12% in the last 6 hours, he reported to Sensei, who stood behind him like a proud father reviewing his child's school project. 3 different agencies requesting backup protocols for basic operations. 2 hero schools considering increased security measures. Excellent, and the personal responses. Izuku switched feeds to show surveillance footage from various locations around the city. Bakugo's been at the All Might Agency for 7 hours analyzing the destruction. Todoroki and Ida joined him 4 hours ago. They're beginning to connect the dots. And your mother? The feed switched to show Inko's apartment, where she sat surrounded by his abandoned possessions. Even through the grainy video, her anguish was visible. She's starting to understand, Izuku said, his voice carefully neutral. The guilt is setting in. How does that make you feel? Izuku considered the question, studying his mother's broken form on the monitor. He waited for anger, for satisfaction, for some echo of the burning rage that had sustained him through his transformation. Instead, he felt empty. I thought it would feel like justice, he admitted quietly. Watching them realize what they'd done, seeing them suffer the consequences of their choices, but it just feels hollow. Yeah. Sensei's hand settled on his shoulder with surprising gentleness. That's because revenge, no matter how justified, is ultimately a dead end. It can motivate transformation, but it can't sustain it. Then what can? Purpose, vision, the determination to build something better from the ashes of what came before. Sensei gestured to the monitors showing a city in crisis. You've proven that the old system is fundamentally flawed. Now comes the harder task, showing them what should replace it. Izuku turned away from the screens, his mind already working through possibilities. Phase 3. Phase 3, Sensei confirmed. It's time to stop simply destroying their assumptions and start offering alternatives. After all, the greatest revolutionaries in history weren't just excellent at tearing down, they were visionaries who could build up. As he prepared for the next stage of his plan, Izuku felt the hollow space in his chest begin to fill with something new. Not the hot rage that had driven his initial transformation, nor the cold satisfaction of successful revenge, but something more sustainable. Purpose. Tomorrow, he would begin teaching the world a very different lesson about power, justice, and the price of indifference. Tonight, he would let his former friends and family sit with the weight of their realizations, learning, perhaps for the first time, what it felt like to be powerless in the face of forces beyond their control. The emergency meeting of Japan's top heroes took place in a secure underground facility that had never before hosted such a gathering outside of national crisis protocols. The attendees read like a who's who of professional heroism: Endeavor, Hawks, Best Jeanist, Mirko, and dozens of others whose combined experience represented centuries of villain combat. At the head of the table sat All Might, or what remained of him. The skeletal figure bore little resemblance to the symbol of peace who had once inspired a generation, but his presence still commanded attention through sheer force of reputation. The situation is unprecedented, announced the Hero Commission's president, a stern woman whose composure seemed to crack with every word. In 6 months, this individual has caused more systematic damage to hero operations than any villain organization in the past decade. Hawks leaned back in his chair, his golden eyes sharp with interest. Run through the numbers again. 47 successful operations with 0 captures. Estimated property damage in the hundreds of millions. Public confidence in heroes down 30% and falling. Most concerning, he's begun specifically targeting hero students. A murmur ran through the room. Targeting students crossed lines that even most villains respected. What do we know about his capabilities? Endeavor's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His quirk analysis shows that our analysts don't understand what they're looking at, All Might interrupted, his hollow voice cutting through the discussion. This isn't a traditional quirk, it's something else entirely. Best Jeanist adjusted his collar, his usually perfect composure showing cracks. The tactical reports suggest advanced intelligence gathering capabilities. He knows our patrol routes, our response protocols, our individual fighting styles better than we know them ourselves. Because he's been studying us, Hawks said quietly. Not like a villain preparing for conflict, but like a student preparing for exams. He's treating hero work like an academic subject to be mastered. The president pulled up a holographic display showing footage from recent attacks. Analysis suggests he's capable of utilizing elements from at least 30 different quirks, often simultaneously. The synthesis patterns don't match any known quirk type. Show them the UA footage, All Might said. The hologram shifted to display crystal clear video from inside UA's supposedly secure facilities. Heroes gasped as they watched themselves in faculty meetings, strategy sessions, even private conversations, all recorded from impossible angles. He's been inside our most protected facilities, the president continued. Not just infiltrating, but studying. We found cameras in 17 different locations, some placed months ago. Mirko slammed her fist on the table, cracks spreading through the reinforced surface. Enough analysis, where is the bastard? Let's end this. That's the problem, All Might said, his voice heavy with defeat. We don't just not know where he is, we don't know who he is anymore. Before anyone could respond, the room's lights flickered and died. Emergency illumination kicked in a second later, bathing everything in eerie red light. When their vision adjusted, they found a figure standing at the far end of the room. He was tall, lean, and wore a simple black outfit that seemed to absorb light. His face was partially hidden by a mask, but his distinctive green hair was unmistakable. Most unsettling were his eyes, not the bright, hopeful green of childhood, but something darker, more calculating. Good evening, Izuku said, his voice carrying clearly despite the room's acoustics. Thank you all for gathering, it saves considerable time. Chaos erupted immediately. Heroes launched themselves forward, quirks blazing, but Izuku simply wasn't there when their attacks landed. He flowed like water, shifted like smoke, moved with inhuman grace that suggested he was operating under entirely different physical laws. How Hawks began, his feathers spread for attack. How did I get in? Izuku completed the question, settling into a chair at the table's opposite end as if he'd been invited. How am I avoiding your attacks? How do I know your every move before you make it? His form flickered, becoming translucent for a moment before solidifying again. The answer is disappointingly simple. I've been watching you all for so long that you've become predictable. Endeavor favors his right side because of an old shoulder injury. Hawks relies too heavily on his feathers' reconnaissance, creating blind spots. Mirko telegraphs her kicks with a distinctive stance shift. Each observation was delivered with clinical precision, and each hero found their next intended move perfectly predicted and countered. You're Midoriya Izuku, Endeavor said, flames crackling around his form but held in check, the missing UA student. Was, Izuku corrected, that boy died the night he left the school, I'm something else now. What do you want? The commission president demanded, her hand hovering over what was probably an emergency alert. To deliver a message and a demonstration. Izuku gestured casually, and the room's temperature dropped by 20 degrees while simultaneously filling with a soft, green light that seemed to emanate from his skin. You've been operating under several false assumptions about me. Tonight, we correct them. All Might leaned forward, his hollow eyes fixed on the figure who had once been his biggest fan. Midoriya, young Midoriya, whatever you've become, whatever you think you're doing. I'm teaching, Izuku interrupted, the same way you taught me, through demonstration. His form began to shift, and suddenly the heroes found themselves facing not one figure, but dozens. Each copy displayed different quirk manifestations: fire, ice, electricity, transformation, enhancement. But more disturbing was the way each copy moved with perfect knowledge of the hero's capabilities and weaknesses. Lesson 1: Power without understanding is worthless. You've all grown comfortable with your abilities, treating them as tools rather than languages. You use fire to burn, ice to freeze, speed to move fast, but you never asked why they work or how they could work differently. One of his copies demonstrated by creating fire that burned cold, ice that conducted electricity, speed that seemed to bend space-time around it. Lesson 2: Intelligence is the ultimate force multiplier. You've dismissed analysis as academic theory, but properly applied knowledge defeats raw power every time. The copies began moving in perfect coordination, their attacks synchronized not just tactically but at a fundamental level, each quirk enhancement the other's effectiveness in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Lesson 3, Izuku continued, his voice now coming from all copies simultaneously, is the most important. You created me. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of various quirks being held in readiness. Every dismissal, every crushed hope, every time you looked at a powerless child and decided he wasn't worth your time, you were forging the weapon that would eventually be turned against you. All Might's voice cracked with emotion. We tried to protect you. You tried to protect yourselves, Izuku corrected, his copies beginning to circle the table like predators. From the inconvenience of dealing with someone who didn't fit your narrow definition of heroic potential, from having to confront the possibility that your system was fundamentally flawed. What do you want from us? Hawks asked, his wings twitching with nervous energy. Recognition, Izuku said simply, acknowledgement of what you created, understanding of why I had no choice but to become this. Endeavor's flames flared. You always had a choice. Did I? One of Izuku's copies materialized directly in front of the flame hero, moving through his fire without harm. When All Might told me to give up my dreams, when my classmates treated me like dead weight, when my own mother looked at me like I was a burden she couldn't bear. The copy's hand settled on Endeavor's shoulder, and suddenly the hero's flames guttered out completely. When every door was slammed in my face, every helping hand withdrawn, every source of hope systematically destroyed, exactly what choice did I have? You could have found another path, Best Jeanist began. What path? Izuku's voice carried genuine curiosity. Support work, I tried. They said I didn't have the right temperament. Police work, they suggested I wasn't physically capable. Teaching, they questioned what I could possibly teach others about heroism. The copies began to dissolve one by one until only the original remained, standing at the table's head where the commission president had been sitting. Every legitimate path was closed to me by people who decided my worth based on a medical diagnosis, so I found an illegitimate one. This isn't the answer, All Might pleaded. Violence, terrorism, destroying everything we've built. I'm not destroying everything you built, Izuku corrected. I'm revealing that what you built was always an illusion, a pretty story about justice and heroism that conveniently ignored anyone who didn't fit the narrative. He pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table. These are the files I recovered from your agencies. Do you know what I found? Lists of problem individuals who showed heroic aspirations but lacked suitable quirks. Plans to redirect them into more appropriate career paths. Psychological profiles designed to explain away systematic discrimination as individual failure. The heroes shifted uncomfortably as he spread documents across the table. You didn't just fail me, Izuku continued. You failed hundreds of people like me. The only difference is that most of them gave up quietly instead of deciding to make noise. So what now? Mirko demanded. You've made your point. What's the endgame? Izuku smiled, and it was the first genuine expression they'd seen from him. Now we find out if heroes are capable of real change, or if you're so attached to your comfortable lies that you'll fight to preserve them even when confronted with the consequences. He moved toward the room's exit, his form beginning to shimmer again. I'll be watching, he said as he faded from view, waiting to see if you learned anything from tonight's lesson. Wait, All Might called out, struggling to his feet. If we acknowledge what we did wrong, if we try to make changes, would you consider coming back? Izuku's voice echoed from empty air, returning to the fold like a prodigal son grateful for forgiveness. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Ask me again when you've actually changed something, when you've created a world where the next powerless child with impossible dreams doesn't have to choose between giving up and becoming a monster. And if we can't, if we fail, The lights flickered once more, and when they steadied, a final message had appeared written in frost across the room's windows. Then you'll learn what it feels like to be powerless in a world that doesn't care about your suffering. As the heroes sat in stunned silence, processing the implications of what they'd witnessed, one thought echoed through multiple minds. How do you fight someone who knows exactly how you think, move, and react? How do you save someone who no longer wants to be saved? And how do you fix a system that might have been broken from the very beginning? The emergency meeting had been intended to develop strategies for capturing a dangerous villain. Instead, it had become an indictment of everything they claimed to stand for. Outside in the night, Izuku made his way through the city's shadows, his mind already working on the next phase of his plan. Tonight had been about forcing recognition, making them acknowledge the consequences of their actions. Tomorrow would be about finding out if recognition could lead to genuine change, or if some systems were simply too broken to be reformed. The abandoned Camino Ward warehouse where it all began felt different now, sacred in the way battlefields become when soaked with enough significance. Izuku stood among the rubble where All Might had once faced All for One, where the symbol of peace had made his final stand, where the golden age of heroes had effectively ended. How fitting that this would be where it truly died. The meeting had been his idea, broadcast across every hero communication channel simultaneously. A simple message: tomorrow night, Camino Ward, Warehouse District 7, come alone or don't come at all, time to finish what you started. I am. They'd come, of course, all three of them. Katsuki Bakugo arrived first, explosions crackling around his palms as he stalked through the debris-strewn entrance. His hero costume had evolved since UA, more tactical, less flashy, but his skull remained exactly the same. Deku, his voice echoed through the empty space. I know you're here, you coward, come out and face me. Still leading with intimidation, I see. Izuku's voice drifted from the shadows above. Some things never change. Bakugo spun toward the sound, but Izuku was already elsewhere, his enhanced mobility keeping him just out of sight. Though I have to admit, the costume redesign shows growth, less ego, more function. Someone's been teaching you tactics. Shut up! Bakugo launched himself skyward, explosions propelling him toward where the voice had originated. He found nothing but empty air. Tell me, Kaken, Izuku continued, his voice now coming from ground level. Do you remember the last thing you said to me at UA? Bakugo landed hard, concrete cracking under the impact. His red eyes darted frantically as he tried to locate his target. You told me I'd get someone killed because I was dead weight, that I was too weak to save anyone, even myself. Izuku finally stepped into view, emerging from behind a support pillar with casual confidence. Turns out you were right about the killing part, just wrong about who'd be doing it. The explosion that followed lit up half the warehouse, but when the smoke cleared, Izuku stood exactly where he'd been, unharmed and unmoved. Bakugo's attack had simply flowed around him. Impossible, Bakugo breathed. Is it? You always assumed I was weak because I couldn't hit back. But what if I was just choosing not to? Izuku raised one hand, and suddenly Bakugo found himself lifted into the air by invisible forces, not Uraraka's gravity manipulation, but something more complex. What if all those years of being your punching bag were just research? Before Bakugo could respond, a wall of ice erupted between them, followed by a voice that carried the weight of nobility and regret. That's enough. Shoto Todoroki entered through the warehouse's main door, his heterochromatic eyes taking in the scene with tactical assessment. Unlike Bakugo's aggressive entrance, his approach was measured, controlled. Todoroki, Izuku lowered his hand, allowing Bakugo to drop heavily to the ground. Right on time, though I expected you to bring backup. This conversation is between us, Todoroki replied, ice crystals forming around his right side while heat shimmed from his left. Whatever grievances you have, whatever we did wrong, we need to face it ourselves. Grievances? Izuku laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the cavernous space. Is that what you think this is about? Hurt feelings, childhood trauma? His form began to shift, skin taking on metallic properties while small flames danced around his fingers. This is about systematic failure, about a society that sorts people into categories, valuable and worthless, and then pretends the sorting was fair. We know we made mistakes, Todoroki began. Mistakes? Izuku's voice carried genuine disbelief. You think dismissing someone's entire existence is a mistake. You think crushing a child's dreams is just an error in judgment. The temperature in the warehouse began to fluctuate wildly as Izuku's emotional state affected his synthesized quirks. Ice formed and melted simultaneously, creating steam that swirled around them like fog. I watched you, Todoroki, all of you. I studied how you thought, how you made decisions, how you determined who deserved your respect. His eyes glowed with unnatural light, and what I learned is that you never saw me as a person at all, just an obstacle to work around. That's not true. Izuku gestured, and the warehouse filled with holographic displays, surveillance footage from their UA days. Let me show you. The images played out like a nightmare highlight reel. Bakugo's explosions, classmates walking past Izuku as if he didn't exist, group projects that mysteriously had no room for him, study sessions he was never invited to join. Watch your own face, Izuku commanded, focusing on footage of Todoroki during combat training. See how you look through me instead of at me, like I'm furniture, background noise, not worth the effort of acknowledgement. Todoroki's composure cracked as he watched his younger self systematically ignore every attempt Izuku had made to connect or contribute. He started, then stopped, the words dying in his throat. You were what? Following social cues, maintaining group dynamics, protecting your own status by not associating with the class failure. Izuku's voice was clinical, analytical. Or were you just so focused on your own trauma that you couldn't spare attention for anyone else's suffering? Before Todoroki could respond, the warehouse's main doors exploded inward, not from quirk usage, but from someone simply walking through them with enough force to shatter reinforced steel. All Might, in his skeletal true form, entered the space with halting steps, his hollow eyes fixed on the young man who had once been his greatest admirer. Young Midoriya, his voice carried exhaustion and something that might have been hope. You came. Of course I came. Izuku turned to face his former idol, and for a moment something flickered across his features, not quite pain but an echo of old wounds. You three represent everything I used to believe in, everything I thought I wanted to become. He gestured to encompass all of them, the symbol of peace who inspired a generation, the prodigy who overcame family trauma to become a hero, the rival who pushed others to be their best. His expression darkened. But those were just stories, weren't they? Pretty lies told to children who didn't know better. No, All Might said firmly, stepping closer despite the obvious danger. Those aren't lies, we are those things, but we're also flawed people who made terrible mistakes. Mistakes, Izuku repeated the word like it tasted bitter. That word keeps coming up, as if what you did to me was accidental. It was, Bakugo said suddenly, his voice rougher than usual. Not accidental, I did it on purpose, but I didn't understand what I was doing. The warehouse fell silent, except for the distant sounds of the city. I thought, Bakugo continued, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. I thought if I could make you give up, if I could prove you didn't belong, then somehow it would mean I deserved to be there more, like your failure would validate my success. And Izuku's voice was carefully neutral. And I was a fucking idiot. The admission came out like a physical blow. I was so scared that you'd somehow prove that quirks didn't matter, that determination could overcome anything, that I did everything I could to destroy your confidence before you could destroy mine. Todoroki stepped forward, ice and fire swirling around him in agitated patterns. I told myself I was staying neutral, not getting involved, but neutrality in the face of injustice is just cowardice with better branding. And you, Izuku turned to All Might, what's your excuse? The skeletal figure seemed to shrink even further. Fear, he said simply. Fear that if I encouraged you, if I gave you false hope, you'd end up dead because I was too selfish to tell you an ugly truth. The truth being that I couldn't see past your lack of a quirk to recognize the mind that was analyzing and understanding heroism better than students who'd been training for years. All Might's voice carried genuine anguish. I was so focused on preventing your death that I never considered I might be causing something worse. Izuku studied the three figures before him, his childhood tormentor, his dismissed classmate, and his fallen idol. For months, he'd imagined this moment, their acknowledgement of what they'd done, their admission of guilt, their recognition of the monster they'd created. But now that it was happening, he felt empty. "Do you think this fixes anything?" he asked quietly. "Your confessions, your guilt, your sudden understanding of how badly you failed?" "No," All Might said immediately. "Nothing can fix what we broke, but maybe it's not about fixing. Maybe it's about building something better from the pieces." "What could possibly be better?" Izuku's laugh was bitter. "A society that only changes when threatened, a system that only admits its flaws when confronted with consequences, heroes who only develop empathy after creating villains. A world where the next quirkless kid doesn't have to choose between giving up and becoming a monster," Todoroki said quietly. The words hung in the air like a challenge. "You really think you can change things?" Izuku asked. "You think hero society is capable of fundamental transformation?" "We have to try," Bakugo said, "because the alternative is this, forever, and if that's what the world becomes, then we really did fail completely." Izuku was quiet for a long moment, his synthesized quirks fluctuating with his emotional state. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, not the calculated control of a villain, but something rawer, more honest. "Do you know what the worst part was?" he said, and suddenly he looked very young despite everything he'd become. It wasn't the bullying, it wasn't the dismissal, it wasn't even the crushed dreams. He met each of their eyes in turn. It was the isolation, the growing understanding that no one would ever see me as worth saving, that I could disappear tomorrow and the only emotion anyone would feel would be relief that the problem had solved itself. Izuku All Might started. "I used to have nightmares," Izuku continued as if he hadn't heard. "Not about dying, but about living, about spending my entire life as background noise in other people's stories, about being so forgettable that my own existence didn't matter." His form began to shimmer again, the various quirks he'd synthesized creating an aura of barely contained power. "So I made myself impossible to ignore. I became the problem that couldn't be dismissed, the consequence that couldn't be avoided, the failure that wouldn't stay quiet." He looked at each of them again. "And now you see me, now you acknowledge me, now my existence has meaning." "But at what cost?" Todoroki asked. Izuku smiled, and it was the saddest thing any of them had ever seen. "Everything," he said simply. "It cost me everything I used to be, every dream, every hope, every naive belief in heroism and justice and the fundamental goodness of people." The warehouse fell silent again. "So here's my question," Izuku said finally. "Was it worth it, trading the boy you ignored for the monster you fear, getting my attention at the price of my humanity?" None of them had an answer. "Because that's the real test," Izuku continued. "Not whether you can feel guilty about what you did, not whether you can recognize your mistakes, but whether you can look at what I've become, what you made me become, and still believe the system is worth saving." He began walking toward the exit, his form becoming more translucent with each step. "Think about it," he said as he faded from view, "and when you have an answer, a real answer, not just pretty words about change and growth, we'll finish this conversation." "Wait," All Might called out, "where will you be?" Izuku's voice echoed from empty air one last time. "Watching, always watching, waiting to see if heroes are capable of learning from their failures, or if they'll just repeat them with the next powerless child who dreams of something more." As the three heroes stood alone in the ruins of Camino Ward, surrounded by the ghosts of past failures and the weight of impossible choices, one question echoed through their minds. How do you save someone who's already decided they're beyond redemption? How do you prove that change is possible when the evidence suggests otherwise? And how do you build a better world when the foundation itself might be rotten? The confrontation they'd expected had become something far more complex, not a battle between hero and villain, but a reckoning with the uncomfortable truth that the line between the two might be thinner than anyone wanted to admit. The weeks following the Camino confrontation transformed the hero world in ways no one had anticipated. It started small, a policy change here, a revised training protocol there. The Hero Public Safety Commission quietly issued new guidelines about inclusive hero education. UA announced a scholarship program for students with unconventional backgrounds. Support companies began developing gear specifically designed to enhance quirkless individuals' capabilities. But Izuku saw through the performative gestures with the clarity of someone who had spent months studying how the system truly operated. From his position in the abandoned observatory overlooking the city, he watched the changes unfold through networks of surveillance he'd established across Japan. The League had given him resources beyond anything he'd previously imagined, not just funding and equipment, but access to information streams that revealed the gap between public promises and private decisions. "They're trying," Sensei observed, settling beside him with 2 cups of tea. The older villain had been watching Izuku's emotional state carefully since the warehouse meeting, recognizing the dangerous instability of someone caught between revenge and something approaching hope. "Are they?" Izuku pulled up holographic displays showing internal communications from various hero agencies. "Or are they just managing the crisis I represent?" The data was damning. While public speeches talked about reform and inclusion, private memos discussed containing the synthesis threat and preventing copycat incidents. Training sessions focused on identifying potential problem individuals rather than addressing the systematic issues that created them. "Look at this," Izuku highlighted a communication from the Hero Commission to UA's principal. "While we appreciate the need for public perception management, we must ensure that any policy changes don't compromise operational effectiveness or create additional security vulnerabilities." Sensei sipped his tea thoughtfully. "What did you expect? Institutions don't change, they adapt just enough to survive." "I expected," Izuku paused, surprising himself with the admission. "I expected them to at least try, really try, not just perform trying for the cameras." "Ah," Sensei's smile was knowing. "The boy who believed in heroes isn't quite as dead as you thought." Before Izuku could respond, his communication array chimed with an incoming transmission on a frequency only 3 people knew. The video feed showed All Might's skeletal form, but he wasn't alone. Bakugo and Todoroki flanked him, along with several other figures Izuku recognized: Aizawa, Principal Nezu, even Hawks from the Hero Commission. "Young Midoriya," All Might began, his voice carrying exhaustion but also determination. "We need to talk, not about surrender or capture, but about the future." Izuku studied the faces on screen, his enhanced perception analyzing microexpressions and body language. What he saw surprised him, not the fear or anger he'd expected, but something closer to resolve. "I'm listening," he said finally. "The system is broken," All Might continued. "More broken than we wanted to admit. The changes we're making aren't enough, they're just damage control disguised as reform." Bakugo stepped forward, his usual aggression replaced by something rawer. "We've been investigating, really investigating, not just doing PR bullshit. The number of kids who have been pushed out, dismissed, forgotten, it's fucking staggering. Over 300 documented cases in the past 5 years alone," Todoroki added, his voice clinical but his eyes showing emotion. "Children with non-combat quirks told they weren't hero material. Quirkless individuals systematically excluded from every support program. Students whose potential was dismissed because they didn't fit predetermined categories." Izuku felt something twist in his chest, not quite hope, but a crack in the cynicism he'd wrapped around himself like armor. "And what exactly do you propose to do about it?" he asked. "Tear it down," Hawk said, stepping into view. His usual casual demeanor was gone, replaced by sharp focus. "The whole system, start over from scratch." "The Hero Commission has agreed to dissolve itself and transfer authority to a new organization built on different principles," Principal Nezu added. "One that prioritizes development over elimination, potential over power, character over capability." Izuku's laugh was bitter. "And you believe they'll actually follow through? That they won't just rebrand the same discrimination with prettier language?" "Not if we don't give them the choice," Aizawa said, his tired eyes holding unexpected steel. "This isn't a request or a negotiation. We're not asking permission to change, we're announcing that change has already begun." The screen shifted to show footage from across the country, hero agencies publicly burning their exclusion protocols, support companies opening programs for quirkless applicants, schools implementing new curricula that emphasized analysis and strategy alongside physical prowess. "It's happening with or without official approval," All Might said. "The question is whether you'll help us build something better or whether you'll keep tearing down what's left of the old system." Izuku was quiet for a long moment, processing what he was seeing. The changes weren't just cosmetic, they represented fundamental shifts in how hero society approached power, worth, and inclusion. But trust once shattered wasn't easily rebuilt. "Why should I believe you?" he asked finally. "After everything that's happened, everything you've done, why should I trust that this isn't just another manipulation?" "Because," Bakugo said, his voice rougher than usual, "we're not asking you to trust us, we're asking you to test us." "Explain." Todoroki pulled out a tablet displaying architectural plans and organizational charts. "We're building a new hero academy, one designed from the ground up to serve everyone, quirked, quirkless, weak quirks, unusual quirks, anyone with the mind and heart for heroism. We want you to help design it," All Might added. "Your analytical abilities, your understanding of systematic failures, your insights into what doesn't work, we need that perspective to avoid repeating the same mistakes." Izuku stared at the plans, his mind automatically analyzing the proposed structure. It was ambitious, more than ambitious, it was revolutionary. Training programs based on individual potential rather than power scaling. Leadership tracks that emphasize strategic thinking over combat prowess. Support systems designed to develop every student's unique capabilities. "You're serious," he said, and it wasn't quite a question. "Dead serious," Hawks confirmed. "But it can't just be us making these decisions. If we really want to change things, we need voices from people who have been harmed by the old system. People who understand failure from the inside. People like you," Aizawa said quietly. The offer hung in the air like a bridge across an impossible chasm. On one side lay everything Izuku had become, the power, the purpose, the fear and respect that came with being a threat too dangerous to ignore. On the other lay something he'd thought lost forever, the possibility of building instead of destroying. "And if I refuse?" he asked. "If I decide that the system is too corrupt to reform, that only complete destruction can clear the ground for something new?" "Then we'll keep building anyway," All Might said. "But we'll do it without the insights of someone who's seen the system's failures more clearly than anyone else, and that makes us more likely to repeat those failures in new ways." "You're not asking me to forgive you," Izuku realized. "No," Todoroki confirmed. "Forgiveness has to be earned, and we haven't done that yet. We're asking you to help us try to earn it." Izuku closed his eyes, feeling the weight of a choice that would define not just his future, but the future of hero society itself. Around him, he could sense Sensei and the other league members waiting for his decision, some hopeful, others skeptical, all understanding that this moment would determine whether their revolution continued through destruction or transformation. When he opened his eyes, his decision was clear. "I have conditions," he said. "Name them," All Might replied immediately. "First, full transparency, no classified decisions, no secret meetings, no policies implemented without public discussion. If we're building a new system, it has to be built in the light." "Agreed." "Second, real accountability, not just for future mistakes, but for past ones. Every student who was failed by the old system gets a chance to participate in the new one. Every exclusion protocol gets publicly examined and explained." "Agreed." Third, Izuku paused, his voice dropping to something almost vulnerable. "I don't stop being who I've become just because I'm helping you build something better. The League of Villains gave me a home when Hero Society threw me away. I won't abandon them for the promise of redemption." The screen was quiet for several heartbeats. "We understand," All Might said finally, "though I hope eventually you'll find that you don't need to choose between the family that accepted you and the chance to build a world where no one else has to make that choice." Izuku nodded slowly. "Then we have an accord. I'll help you build your new academy. I'll share my insights into systematic failure and reform, but I remain synthesis and I remain free to operate as I see fit." "Fair enough," Hawk said, "though maybe synthesis can become something more than just a villain name." Such as the architect of change, the bridge between what was and what could be. All Might's voice carried hope tempered by realism, the one who synthesizes the best of both worlds. As the communication ended and plans began to take shape, Izuku felt something he hadn't experienced in months: possibility. Not hope exactly, that would take more proof than promises, but the genuine chance that maybe, just maybe, the boy who had dreamed of being a hero and the young man who had become a villain could work together to create something neither could have built alone. The revolution would continue, but now it would build as well as burn. And perhaps that was the most heroic thing of all. 1 year later, the Midoriya Institute for Heroic Innovation stood as a testament to what could be built from the ashes of broken dreams. Unlike the imposing fortress-like structure of UA, the institute resembled something between a university campus and a research facility. Glass and steel buildings connected by covered walkways with training areas that looked more like laboratories than battlegrounds. Gardens and common spaces encouraged interaction between students from different tracks: combat, support, analysis, coordination, even a new field called systematic innovation that focused on identifying and addressing societal problems at their roots. Izuku stood in the main observation deck, watching the morning classes through floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, a group of students worked through a complex scenario that required not just individual skill but collaborative problem-solving. He recognized several faces, former outcasts from various schools who had found new purpose here, alongside traditionally powerful students learning to think beyond raw strength. Admiring your handiwork. The voice belonged to Hawks, who approached with 2 cups of coffee and his usual easy smile. The former commission hero had thrown himself into the Institute's development with surprising passion, his strategic mind proving invaluable in navigating the political complexities of systematic change. Our handiwork, Izuku corrected, accepting the cup, though I have to admit, seeing it actually work is surreal. Having second thoughts. Always, Izuku's smile was wry, but productive ones. We've solved some problems and created new ones. The question is whether we're learning from both. Through the window, they watched a young girl with a seemingly useless quirk. She could make small objects slightly more colorful, work with a team to solve a hostage scenario. Her enhancement abilities, combined with a partner's light manipulation and another's enhanced vision, created a communication system that allowed for perfect coordination in poor visibility conditions. Remember when we thought power scaling was the only measure of heroic potential? Hawks asked. I remember when you thought that, Izuku replied. I always knew it was more complex, I just couldn't prove it until I had the platform. The past year had been a delicate balance between transformation and integration. Izuku maintained his connections to the League of Villains, though their activities had shifted toward what they called constructive disruption, exposing corruption, preventing systematic abuses, ensuring that the new institutions didn't simply replicate the old problems with fresh paint. Not everyone approved. Traditional heroes still viewed him with suspicion, and some villains saw his cooperation as betrayal, but the results spoke for themselves. Graduation rates up 300%, student satisfaction at unprecedented levels, and most importantly, a significant decrease in the kind of systematic exclusion that had defined the old system. The Seoul delegation is here, Hawks mentioned, checking his phone. They want to tour the facility and discuss implementing similar programs in South Korea. 5th international delegation this month, Izuku noted. Either we're doing something right or we're very good at marketing failure. Both probably changes messy. A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Aizawa entered, looking marginally less exhausted than usual. The new teaching structure allowed for better work-life balance, something the previous system had treated as a luxury rather than necessity. Status report, Izuku asked. Mixed bag. The good news is that our first graduating class is showing exceptional results across all metrics. The challenging news is that some of them are struggling with identity issues. Explain. They don't know how to classify themselves in the traditional hero-villain binary. They've been trained to think systemically, to question authority, to prioritize justice over law when the two conflict. Aizawa's expression was thoughtful. Some are calling them gray heroes, not quite fitting existing categories. Izuku nodded. That was always inevitable. We're training them to think differently, so of course they'll act differently. The question is whether society can adapt to accommodate new approaches to heroism. Speaking of adaptation, Hawks interjected, pulling up a news feed on his tablet. You should see this. The screen showed footage from downtown Musutafu, where a crisis was unfolding. A building collapse had trapped dozens of civilians, and the rescue operation was being coordinated not by traditional heroes, but by a team of institute graduates working with reformed league members. What struck Izuku wasn't the efficiency of the rescue, though that was impressive, but the methodology. Instead of rushing in with maximum force, the team had established a command post, analyzed the structural damage, coordinated with civilian authorities, and was systematically extracting victims while stabilizing the building. Look at the news coverage, Hawk said, switching feeds. Where traditional hero rescues were typically framed around individual acts of courage and power, this operation was being covered as a collaborative effort between multiple organizations. The reporters were asking questions about methodology, coordination, and long-term prevention, rather than simply celebrating heroic spectacle. The narrative is changing, Izuku observed. Your narrative is becoming the mainstream narrative, Aizawa corrected. Whether that's good or bad remains to be seen. A communication alert chimed from Izuku's personal device, a message on a frequency only one person used. Building something beautiful, I see. The boy who believed in heroes would be proud. S. Sensei, still watching, still guiding in his own way, but from a distance now. The League had evolved too, becoming something between a watchdog organization and a philosophical movement. They operated in the spaces between legal and illegal, ensuring that the new system didn't calcify into the same problems as the old. There's something else, Aizawa continued. All might ask me to give you this. He handed over a sealed envelope with Izuku's name written in the distinctive handwriting he remembered from signed photographs. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short message. Young Midoriya. Today marks exactly 2 years since you left UA. I wanted you to know that the boy who walked away that night was not a failure. He was someone the system failed to recognize or nurture. The difference matters. Watching what you've built, seeing the lives you've changed, I'm reminded that heroism was never about the power we possess, but about what we choose to do with whatever strength we have. You've proven that in ways I never could. The symbol of peace was always meant to be temporary, a placeholder until something better could take its place. I think we found that something in what you've created here. Thank you for not giving up on the possibility that broken things can be rebuilt into something stronger. Tashinori Yagi. Izuku read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in his jacket pocket. How does it feel, Hawks asked quietly, having your former idol's approval? Izuku considered the question as he watched the ongoing rescue operation through the window. The Institute students were working alongside traditional heroes now, their different approaches complementing rather than competing with each other. Like validation I no longer need, he said finally. The boy who left UA was looking for approval, for someone to tell him he was worthy of becoming a hero, but that's not who I am anymore. Who are you now? Izuku smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached his eyes completely. I'm someone who doesn't need permission to change the world. Someone who understands that the most important battles aren't fought in costumes with flashy quirks, but in classrooms and policy meetings and quiet conversations where we decide what kind of future we want to build. A commotion below caught their attention. A new group of students had arrived for their entrance interviews, not the traditional combat assessments, but comprehensive evaluations that considered analytical thinking, collaborative potential, ethical reasoning, and innovative problem-solving alongside any physical capabilities. Among them, Izuku spotted a small figure with green hair who looked nervously excited. A quirkless boy, probably around 14, clutching application papers and looking up at the institute buildings with the same awe Izuku had once felt looking at UA. Excuse me, Izuku said, heading for the door. He made his way down to the entrance hall where prospective students were gathering with their families. The green-haired boy stood slightly apart from the others, his posture suggesting he wasn't entirely sure he belonged. First time here, Izuku asked, approaching casually. The boy looked up, his eyes widening as he recognized who was speaking to him. Your synthesis, you're really him. I'm Izuku Midoriya, he corrected gently. Synthesis is just a name, what's yours? Kenji Nakamura, the boy said, then hesitated. I don't have a quirk, but I read about what you've built here, about how you think intelligence and analysis can be just as valuable as traditional powers, and I thought maybe you could find a place where being different is seen as an asset rather than a liability, Izuku finished. Kenji nodded, his expression hopeful but guarded, the look of someone who had learned not to expect too much. Let me tell you something, Kenji, Izuku said, kneeling to meet the boy's eyes. I once knew a quirkless kid who dreamed of becoming a hero. Everyone told him it was impossible, that he should give up, that he didn't have what it takes. What happened to him? He learned that they were wrong about what it takes. That heroism isn't about the power you're born with, but about the courage to use whatever abilities you have to make the world better. Izuku stood, gesturing to the bustling activity around them, and eventually he built a place where other people could learn that too. Kenji's eyes were bright now, the guarded hope becoming something more confident. "You're going to do great here," Izuku continued. "Not because I'm telling you that you will, but because I can see it in how you think, how you observe, how you question. Those are the qualities that change the world." As he walked away, leaving Kenji to join his interview group with new confidence, Izuku felt a familiar sensation, not the desperate hunger for validation he'd once carried, but the quiet satisfaction of seeing potential recognized and nurtured. His phone buzzed with another message, this one from Bakugo. "Heard you found another stray. Don't make him as much trouble as you turned out to be." Despite himself, Izuku laughed. Some things really didn't change, but others transformed completely. That evening, as the sun set over the institute campus, Izuku stood once again in the observation deck. The buildings were quieter now, most students having returned to dormitories or gone home to their families. But light still shone in several research labs where advanced students worked on projects that blurred the lines between heroics, technology, and social innovation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: political pressure from traditionalists, funding concerns, the ongoing complexity of managing revolutionary change without losing sight of fundamental values. But tonight, he could see the future taking shape in the work being done by young minds who had been taught to think beyond the limitations others had tried to impose on them. A soft footstep announced another presence. Izuku turned to find Sensei approaching, his expression carrying the same paternal pride it had worn in the League's hideout. "No regrets?" the older man asked. "About which part? Leaving UA, becoming a villain, trying to change hero society from the outside, or deciding to change it from the inside instead?" "Any of it, all of it." Izuku considered the question, as he had many times over the past year. "I regret that it took so long. I regret that others had to suffer the same systematic failures I did before we found a better way. I regret that change required breaking things that some people valued." He paused. "But I don't regret the choices I made. Each one led to the next, and all of them led here." Even becoming a villain. Especially that, because heroes who have never questioned the system can't rebuild it. Heroes who have never experienced failure can't understand what it teaches. Heroes who have never been powerless can't design institutions that serve everyone. Sensei nodded slowly. "And now? Now we find out if what we've built can survive success the way it survived failure. If the institutions we've created can evolve and adapt, or if they'll calcify into new forms of the old problems." Optimistic or pessimistic? Izuku smiled as he watched the lights of the city beyond the campus, millions of people living their lives, pursuing their dreams, facing their own struggles with systems that might now offer more chances for inclusion and growth. "Realistic," he said finally. "Change is hard and it's never finished, but for the first time in my life, I believe it's possible." As they stood together in the gathering darkness, teacher and student, villain and hero, architect and destroyer, the future stretched out before them, full of uncertainty and promise in equal measure. The boy who had dreamed of becoming the greatest hero had failed. The young man who had become a feared villain had succeeded beyond his wildest plans. But the architect of change who stood watching over the next generation of heroes, he was just getting started. Some stories end with victory or defeat, redemption or damnation. But the best stories, the ones that matter, end with the understanding that every ending is just another beginning, every failure just another chance to build something better from the pieces. In the distance, a new day was already beginning to dawn. The end. And there you have it, Izuku's incredible journey from discarded dreamer to feared villain to architect of change. From that broken boy crying in an empty apartment to the mastermind who brought All Might to his knees, to finally becoming someone who could build a better world from the ashes of the old one. The transformation is absolutely insane. What was your favorite moment? That brutal confrontation with All Might in his own agency, the psychological warfare in Camino Ward, or maybe seeing Izuku finally get the recognition he deserved, even if it came at such a dark price? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more epic fanfic breakdowns like this, and let me know what concepts you want to see next. I'm always hunting for the most broken and brilliant what-if scenarios in anime. Alright guys, that's a wrap on this absolute masterpiece. Peace out.